On today's episode of PolicyWise,
I'm still baffled at why the school is trying to close a deficit that they anticipate having years from now by closing schools.
You have a lot of policy conversations. It's easy to think about it in the theoretical or in the abstract, but these are children. These are families being affected.
It happens in a lot of different neoliberal institutions where closure and privatization is the avenue that administrations choose to go down.
We start to see that pipeline of people getting in trouble in school and then getting in trouble outside of school, all because their education isn't being prioritized.
It was revealed to to Twitter, quite frankly, that there was a developer on site of one of the East Oakland schools that was set to be closed with one of the school board members doing a tour of the campus.
but more on that later.
Welcome to PolicyWise. Well, today we have Councilmember Carroll Fife, who has been leading movements and organizing people in the city of Oakland for quite a while, and is now really one of the leading voices when it comes to issues of equity and housing and many others.
I am Carroll Fife. I'm a longtime organizer in the city of Oakland, and I was recently elected to represent Oakland's District 3. There's a lot of work to do there. A lot of work. And so I don't like talking about myself. So if people do want to know more about me, please Google me and read all of the things that are good, none of the things that are negative, and we can go from there.
Today, we wanted to talk about the Oakland School District and the recent decision to close schools and merge certain schools that has been voted on. What is a little bit of background information that you can give us to get an idea of the situation predating the decision?
Well, that's difficult to say because the decisions for closures are decisions that are consistently a part of the agenda from the administration with the Oakland Unified School District. So we're in that time frame right now where, once again, many schools are being forced to close, but we've been here before. I'm a former teacher. I didn't get to spend as much time in the classroom as I had intended because when I was finishing up my graduate degree for urban education at Holy Names University in Oakland, I started working on a mayoral campaign in 2014. And have been in electoral politics ever since. So I never finished. I just had to write my thesis on urban education. It was, hey kids, stay in school. But other than that, I would be teaching in OUSD right now had I not worked on that campaign. But it was an issue then, right? It's been an issue, an ongoing issue in Oakland where closure is the way that our city, well, I'm sorry, I work for the city, but it happens in a lot of different neoliberal institutions where closure and privatization is the avenue that administrations choose to go down versus other potential cost-saving efforts. And so it's a problem. And it's been happening for years in the city of Oakland. My daughter has been more deeply entrenched in the organizing than I've been. She's a senior at Met West High School, and she was one of the primary youth organizers for the Black students that were supporting reparations in schools. And now she's also a part of the school closures organizing.
Would you mind setting the stage for us? What was happening recently with the school closures? I mean, we could read all about it, but would love to hear it straight from somebody who's been in the midst.
And that's what's confusing to me. And quite honestly, I'm still baffled at why the school is trying to close a deficit that they anticipate having years from now by closing schools, this year and next year. So I'm confused by that. There was a budget surplus with Oakland Unified School District, and they said because of low enrollment, that in order to ensure that they keep costs down over the next few years to come, they need to close schools now. Because I guess COVID created this situation where not as many young people are coming into the classroom. But the cost savings that would come from closing the schools comes nowhere close to the amount of of money that the district is saying that they need to make up. So it's none of it makes sense to me.
Okay. I'm glad that you're saying that none of it makes sense because when I was trying to figure it out, it didn't make sense. um, so
Right.
it sounds
Right.
like, I mean, my guess is that there's a piece to this that is in public. Uh, that would be my
Yes,
guess.
that is my guess as well, especially because it was um, it was revealed to some of well, to Twitter, quite frankly, that there was a developer that was on site of one of the East Oakland schools that was set to be closed with one of the school board members doing a tour of the campus. And
Mm.
they wouldn't check in, they wouldn't give their names to the office. But I know there was a nonprofit developer as well as a school board president, Gary Yee, who was touring one of the sites in East Oakland. And the speculation is that they want to develop that site into a different use. So I would argue that yes, there's probably something going on that we don't know about, and that is unfortunate.
Wow.
And so, with this decision, what can we expect to see moving on now?
With the decision, well, originally there were several schools that were slated to be closed, including one of the oldest public schools in the city of Oakland, which is in my district, and that's Prescott Elementary School,
Mm.
150 years old. And it's a school that has been targeted for many years with co-location of charter schools for closure, as well as several other West Oakland schools. And I was like, it's going to be a problem if you are trying to close all of these schools in my district. And for some reason, I'm not exactly sure, but we did a huge demonstration at Prescott. I brought my office together with the school board director's office and a lot of community organizations, including the Community Ready Corps, Parents United, and several others, um, to just voice our
Mm.
concerns and our pushback to this operation. So all of the West Oakland schools were taken off the list for closure.
Wow.
And so now they're only East Oakland schools. But we see Oakland Unified School District as one district. We're one family,
Hmm.
and we're going to fight no matter where we're located for the families who will be impacted by these decisions. So they're still slated, the schools are still slated for closure at the end of this year, and there's other ones in East Oakland slated for closure next year.
And I'm glad that you mentioned impact, like the families that are going to be
Mm,
impacted, because this isn't necessarily, I feel like when you have a lot of policy conversations, it's easy to think about it in the theoretical or in the abstract, but these are children, these are
right,
families being affected. This is livelihoods. This is your route to school. This is,
right.
whether you're able to access an education, and be fully present. What are some of the impacts? Which communities are being impacted by this?
Uh, Unfortunately, in this country, I think it's clear when these types of decisions are made who will be impacted.
Yeah.
When people's lives are uprooted, it's typically poor people, Black people, Latinx people, queer people. It's all of the marginalized populations that are typically steamrolled by power and money. And so s- I'll give you an example of one that my daughter told me about. She attends Met West High School, and they share a campus with La Suelita. It's one of the schools that it's not completely closing, but they're closing some of the grades, right? So she has a friend who goes to Met West, and their younger sibling goes on to school at the elementary school on the same campus. So now their family will be forced to either take the high schooler out of school and try to find a location that is mutually mutually beneficial for both students. Because the students from La Solita matriculate to Met West. And so if now in the morning they have to go in two different directions, that adds to the burden of time for getting your kids to school. It adds to the distance. And let's talk about the environmental pollution that causes if people are using, cars to get back and forth and trek across the the city to go to a different school, or if it's public transportation, then it lengthens your time to drop your kids off at school, which then impacts your ability to get to work at a certain time. I mean, things just are and that's just one of the simple cases, because there are other cases where they're talking about closing community day, which is the only alternative school that young people can go to when they aren't able to go to any of the other schools that they've been into, because they've had incidents where they can't go to Oakland Public Schools anymore. It's the last opportunity to get a high school diploma or do continuation in Oakland high school setting at community day. So, you know, I think the only other alternative location is in Hayward. So, you know, once again, I'm not a professional on this particular issue. I am involved. I am supportive. I've been at the marches. I've been at the rallies, and I've contributed other resources. But what I do know is that this is a story that keeps happening to Black and Brown families in Oakland over and over again. And when you don't have an opportunity to have a semblance of peace and security where you can build and just have, you know, a little bit of just downtime to just think so you can thrive, then that upsets an entire generation.
Yeah.
And education is so key that I don't know why these types of games are being played by the administration. It's quite harmful.
So when we talk about impact, I think this is really important and is actually something that we can connect to the last episode we did on Michael's idea about increasing access to higher education, because what we see is when there isn't a foundation laid out starting in elementary school, there's less likely to be one laid out in middle school and then high school, and then that also reduces the opportunities available for people who want to seek a college degree or who want to have a layout for themselves in terms of what they can pursue with careers. And so I just wanted to take a minute to talk about that.
You're absolutely correct. And I think it's terrible, but it's fine, right? It's terrible, but it's fine. It's terrible because we keep going through these cycles where the lives of working class people and BIPOC communities are turned inside out. But it's fine because I think it is creating a whole new wave of activism in the city that COVID just laid dormant to some degree. It created a lull in the activism in the city of Oakland. But this right here, oh my goodness, it is really catching fire with so many different people. And it's coming at the exact same time where I've drawn criticism specifically from law enforcement agencies that are saying that I'm crazy for demanding investment and resources in places other than policing, and specifically in early childhood education and in public education. I believe that when you invest, especially in the years of children's lives between 0 to 5, and then also in the critical developmental stages of middle school, then you create a foundation, like you just said, Mehek, where young people have the opportunity to build on what they've learned. They get to build on that nurturing. And so when it's robust and we pour money into them and resources and opportunities, then we'll see a return on that investment in ways that we just do not see with policing. And by pointing that out doesn't mean that I'm just like, all cops are bastards. That's not what that means when we say invest in children. It means that we want all young people to have the same opportunities at being able to thrive. And we know that comes through investment in early education. And so now that they're cutting schools budgets and literally cutting off children from their future potential by forcing this type of upset to their families, we will see, I guarantee we'll see the impact of this in the near future, because the writing isn't on the wall. We know what happens when they close schools and what happens to neighborhoods, because we have the evidence right here in the city of Oakland that it doesn't save money and it does upset the lives of our residents.
There's quite a bit there that you mentioned. You're preaching to the choir. Let me start there. When you, with a lot of points that you're making, especially around investment in young people and
Yeah.
the future generation of the world. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I wanted
Right.
to just kind of thinking about the impact. And you kind of mentioned, some of the minor ones. It kind of remember. Excuse me, makes me remember when I was young, much younger, and I was in fifth grade. Actually, I just graduated fifth grade. I was on my way to middle school. Thought I was a big kid or whatever. Got a call, or my family got a call from the school district. Not the school I was going to was, which my sister currently attended, was closing down, but that they had too many students, and that a few students were randomly selected to have to attend other schools in the district, and then my parents had to pick another school for me to attend. Not only did I cry like a baby, because that meant I was never going to be able to see, not never, but I wasn't able to see many friends for the last time. I had no idea that it was going to be the last time I saw a lot of my friends. But the second part
Wow.
was that my entire family, I mean, if you think about, so I was in sixth grade, my sister was in eighth grade. So we attended two different middle schools for no reason other than
Mm.
they had too many students and I got randomly selected. And so that meant that when we got dropped off in the morning, one of us was going to be late.
Right.
it
Right.
meant it meant when we get picked up, somebody's getting picked up last.
Mm-hmm.
It meant when there was, what is it, when all the parents come to school, the parent teacher conference days, while the parents come and
Yeah, like open house, that kind of
yeah,
thing.
you remember that, like the open house.
Yeah.
At my school district, it all happened on the same day across the district, and so that meant
Oh
Mhm.
my goodness.
I mean,
No. How does
somebody's
that
getting the
work?
parent.
Oh my goodness.
And my mom is a
And then
nurse,
when
and
we
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh wow.
Sorry, Michael, but when we talk about one of the kids is gonna end up being late, well, after a certain amount of tardies, what happens? Then you go to detention. What happens if you get a bunch of detentions? Then the punishment then increases. And so we
Right.
start to see that pipeline of people getting in trouble in school and then getting in trouble outside of school, all because their education isn't being prioritized. So there is like this domino effect that happens.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's why when these chants and the movement started to say that Black Lives Matter, I was like, oh, I wish they did. I really wish
Yeah.
they did. Because you know what matters beyond everything is power. And power is the ability to define phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. That is what Minister Huey P. Newton taught us. And if we do not have the power to push back on these types of decisions and make these to create the phenomena that we want to see in our lives, then we don't have anything. And so the beauty of uh, the power that we do have is what's being rebirthed right now through activism around these school closures. Because once again, it was dormant for a little while, but they don't understand how these restrictive and oppressive tactics just re-energize people to push back and realize that they have power. And so I'm excited about the moment that we're in right now, because I'm seeing parents and families who weren't otherwise activated just be like on fire. And so, yeah, they should bring it on, because people are not going to sit by and allow this to happen.
Council member, you bring up a really good point around the conversation of power and kind of taking the reins. Clearly, that's something that you've done in your past, in your career. In my understanding, when I did a little bit of reading, you come from more of an activist background. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, and I used to have an issue with that because the ways that it was used by the media, it was used as a pejorative.
Right.
To say that I was an activist, because I never classified myself as that, as an activist. I always, the things that I was fighting for, I had to for my family, right? So I'm just like, oh, this is not about to happen. Oh, I'm not about to let that go down. Does anybody else want to? Okay, great. Let's talk about it and let's do something about it. So I never really saw myself as like an activist. I think those are folks who are super, super necessary. But I felt like I was just fighting for my life and the things that I really care about. And so I do come from a background of not taking shit. if that's what you mean, if that's what an activist is,
That's what I like to
and
hear.
not accepting the status quo. But yeah, it was, I always struggled with that when people started realizing who I was. I never wanted that. I didn't want people to know my name or my face. And it just kind of worked out where I got in this position because, yeah, I believe in what I do and what I fight for.
And somebody had to make the change, right?
Oh, well, I'm trying. I'm trying. But this system did not get so calcified overnight. And I've been in office for like not even a year and a half yet. So I'm seeing on the inside how things just remain so terribly corrupt, and why it's difficult to see any change, because I believe that, I'm seeing that there are policymakers that are not elected. And I say policymakers because they sit in the seats inside of City Hall and some of these other places, and typically outlast elected officials, because you have people in positions of government who've worked there for 20 and 30 years, who are just like, no, this is how we do things, and I'm going to be here longer than you will. So even though you pass a law, you don't get to implement it. So we're just going to kick the can down the road or just wait, because we know it's a process getting any policy passed and then implemented. It takes a couple months to draft a resolution, to do the research and get the study done, and then to bring it to council, and then to vote, and then to have it implemented, if it ever gets implemented. And so after a while, you're like, oh, I understand why nothing changes, because it wasn't necessarily designed to do that. So that's why it's also really critical that the streets stay activated, and that there's always pressure from the outside, because left to its own devices, government would not really be the place to be for change.
Yeah.
One of the goals of PolicyWise is to kind of bridge that gap that exists between young people and elected officials and policymakers. And so I kind of want to go back to what we talked about, how there was activism and efforts made, and they were successful in preventing school closures in Oakland. And so I wanted in a certain part of Oakland. And so I wanted to ask a little bit more about what those efforts looked like for people who are listening, and who might want to get into these type of efforts themselves.
So you're asking what efforts stopped the West Oakland school closures?
Yes.
That's a great question, because I cannot put my finger on it. I don't watch a lot of television, but someone made me watch Futurama. And there's this character Bender, who's like a robot, and he had a village of tiny creatures living on them. They thought Bender, who was, a robot with substance abuse issues, who ended up in space, and this colony of living creatures started living on Bender's body. And he was trying to, they were all trying to find God. They were all trying to figure out, like, where is God? And they thought that Bender was God.
All bow before the great Metal Lord!
Because he was so much larger than them.
Who are you?
And it's just this crazy. I definitely encourage everybody to watch it so you can understand what I'm saying. But ultimately, he said he got to meet the real God.
Oh my God! Are you God?
And he said, when you do things right,
people won't be sure you've done anything at all.
That's kind of my philosophy. When you move in a way that actually forces change, and sometimes you might not see the impact of what you're doing, but it comes. Sometimes it's super vocal, and sometimes it's quiet. I love when it's quiet, because it for several reasons, including safety, including, you don't have as many haters. When you can make things move behind the scenes and they happen, oh my goodness, I love that type of activity. So I don't know what happened. I can't put my finger on it, but we know right now that there are no closures happening in District 3 and in West Oakland. And so now we need to have that same type of energy for East Oakland. I think they knew like the floodgates would just pour open. So we got to keep that fire going.
Yeah, and hopefully that hopefully it was a combination of the people being receptive, but also messages being sent to the right places. Um,
Yeah.
I'm curious, kind of thinking about power and change, and kind of how do you perpetuate change in a system that is designed to not? Um, what do you think is kind of the key? There is no silver bullet, but what do you think is your key to enacting change? And what do you think your maybe you have a set time because of term limits. You have a set period of time
Yeah.
in which you can be doing this work. How do you plan on using that time? What do you think your space is there and your role in the time that you're there?
Quite frankly, I think it's to be rebellious. And I am so, if I didn't have young people around me, like people younger than myself, like generations is as young as like some middle schoolers that I'm organizing with, I would probably just be in a deep depression
Mm,
because the people around are so used to doing things the same way. And I love that young people are challenging everything that they've been taught. I mean, we're seeing it with critical race theory, we're seeing it around the environment. We're seeing it with education, just challenging what current with Bitcoin. I don't, what is that? I don't get that. But just challenging everything that that we have as our institutions, I think is key to transforming what currently exists. So I think in my time there, I'm going to continue to challenge the systems that we have. So that it's boring, but I have to get some informational reports on why do we do this way? How much money have we put into this? Why don't we try this? This was passed. Why wasn't it implemented? That's part of my trajectory while I'm on city council. But it's also to introduce legislation that hasn't been done before. It's a short stint, my tenure on council. So we have 4 years. And so I'm going to do as much as I can to shake things up and to introduce new ways of doing things. And I encourage anyone at Berkeley, especially in the School of Public Policy and Statistics, to, to, um, to reach out to my office because there's so much work to do. There's so much that I have on the horizon that I think is transformational. Definitely encourage people to get on board.
that's exciting, and I know that there's a lot of opportunities for folks who are interested in getting their hands a little dirty. In
That's
Oakland, by
right.
dirty, I mean getting good work done. Um,
Yeah, good trouble. Good trouble.
Good trouble, nothing but good trouble.
Yes.
Um, what do you think most shaped your perspective in terms of leadership on the council? Um, do you think that much of that happened as you were growing up? Do you feel like it was in your adult professional career, in your time as a mother? Where do you think kind of most influenced your time as a council
I think
member?
all of the above, right? I had the
Mm,
experience of um or the benefit of being at the same school from the time I was 4 to 14, and then I had that culture shock like you did, Michael, where, we switched schools. And so it wasn't until high school that I had this new reality, but my whole childhood it was so stable and so secure. And then you know moving to a new place and seeing how different things were in public school really changed my perspective. Even as a young person, I'm like, wow, the ways that people are talked to and treated, and the experiences that I had in a public school were so different than when I went to my Christian school. um, and there were challenges in both places. I learned about what racism was even though I didn't have the words when I was in elementary school. But then in public school I learned that resources are unequally distributed. And I learned there's the different stratification of this is my adult language, but I got to see just the differences in people's lives who had free lunch and people who didn't, and people who had access and people who had resources. And so when I grew up and grew up when I was 18, I just started to think differently about everything. Like, why do I believe what I believe? Am I a Christian? Am I agnostic? Like, who am I and why am I? So I started really asking myself these questions because I really wanted my life to matter. And so I definitely knew through my experience at a Baptist, a primarily white Baptist parochial school, that I knew I wanted my life to be of service because I wanted to give back, and I'm a deeply sensitive and loving person, and I wanted other people to have the same type of stability and richness that I had in my childhood. And I got to see, growing up, that a lot of people didn't have that, and I was curious as to why. And so then when I moved to California 3 years later, after I graduated from high school, because my friend on the cheerleading team was like, "Let's go to California." I was like, "Okay," with $200 in my pocket, and was like, I'm gonna make a living. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just knew I didn't want to be in Michigan. And so then I just started seeing. One of my first trips was to Skid Row in LA, and I'm like, how can we allow human beings to live like this? And what are the conditions that create this? And then I started doing a lot of study on race and the origins of this country, and just like chattel slavery and things like that. So a lot of things informed my perspective. And then just coming to Oakland and having a lot of challenges with housing, the cost of housing, being able to find it. But I will say, like, my first apartment was $500 a month for a 1 bedroom in a duplex. And now you can't do that now. And so I'm just like,
I would kill
right?
for it now.
And I was like, oh, how am I going to pay for gas and my rent and cable? And I'm like, please, $500 a month. So, and just to see inflation happen over the last 2 decades in Oakland and the way that it has, and now to see so many more people on the streets of Oakland than I saw on the streets of LA and Skid Row, it breaks my heart. And when my heart gets broken, the world should be concerned, because that's when I want to set stuff on fire. Not literally, but to just, sometimes you got to burn stuff down to make it better. That's how forests grow. And so, yeah, it just, a lot of my personal experience informed my work on council, because I have permanent principles about what I believe in and what people should have access to. And that's what I fight for.
Wow, that was beautifully said. So thank you for enlightening us with that, because I think that was awesome.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I think absolutely. In my personal opinion on elected officials is that they play dual roles, a lot of roles, but two main ones to me. The one part of it is the policy making aspect, the making change. But I think the second one is one that I think less people than I would like realize is also inspiring. It's also representation. It's also being the person who's sitting in the place that can say to somebody, like, we can look into that, or we can do that, or let me see what I can do, or that it's very hard to put into words, but it's to me something that is so valuable in civic society that we almost never talk about, and very few people pay attention to until you have moments like this, or until you have conversations, or like me when I was probably 10 years old. Yes, did the math in my head. 10 years old when Barack got elected and President Obama got elected, and I was like, I don't know what this man is saying, but I know I like it, and I know that that it makes me feel like I can achieve higher. It makes me feel like there's something more that I can do, or that maybe I can be in that space. And we just saw the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. That alone, before she rules on anything, that alone has had an impact on children. It's had impact on people. Right. That just seeing something like that happen to me is also the role of somebody in public service. So I want to thank you for your role in public service and the people you've inspired so far, because it can be a thankless job. And very few people might say thank you because they're too busy yelling at you or whatever else might be part of the job. But thank you for your service.
Wow. That means a lot to me. And thank you for that. And Mehek, I just wanted to say, just in terms of activism, it looks different for different people. I remember hearing a short story on KQED one day about this young woman who was fiercely antisocial and didn't want to go to rallies or marches or not necessarily be around large groups of people, but she wanted to be involved in movement work. So she used her skill at knitting to knit beanies and mittens for people that were out on the front lines during the cold for the actions that they were a part of, and how much of an impact that had on people in her city. And I just thought that was beautiful. And there's so many different ways to contribute from where you are, no matter who you are and where you are. And so, getting active might look different for you than it does for me, but people can find ways to do it. And so there's nothing to it but to do it.
Thank you so much, Councilmember.
I might need to write that down.
I'm so glad we were able to talk with you today and talk about your values and what you stand for. And I know that I wanted to solve problems in the world from a young age, but my understanding of how those problems formed was it was a privilege gifted to me from my education. And so I'm glad we were able also to talk about that today and the importance of education. And I hope to see people continue to fight for it.
Yes, me too. We have to.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. And I do want to say, I am not the master of all things. There are people who know way more than I do around the education fight. And I would I have a list of organizations that I'm working with who are on the ground every single day. Mike Hutchinson, number one, is the GOAT around what's happening with the school board. He's on the board right now. We were in some organizations before in 2014 when I was running a mayoral campaign. Mike and I worked together directly after that to be a part of an organization that continued on the electoral process, and we both got elected at the same time. So it was like meant to be, because we had always been on the outside, like rattling the cages, and then we both got elected during the same year. It was hilarious. But definitely if you all have more time to talk about education, Mike is like an encyclopedia with all of this stuff for years. So I would definitely encourage you speaking to Director Hutchinson from the Board of Education.
Awesome. Thank you. And we might actually have to do that. So I appreciate that call out.
I encourage it. He's a powerhouse and he does not play. So I would definitely encourage that.
Thank you. This was PolicyWise, an intergenerational podcast by Youth Leadership Institute focused on bringing young people into the policy conversation.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at PolicyWisePod. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, please slide into our DMs or send us an email at policywise@yli.org.
And stay tuned for upcoming episodes.